Hi, everyone. Good morning. Wonderful to see you in this giant auditorium. This is actually my first time in this room. It's beautiful. So welcome to the first of what we hope are many collaborations between CCS and Columbia University's Masters in Nonprofit Management. I'm Sarah Holloway, the director of Columbia's Nonprofit Management Program and a faculty member at the School of International and Public Affairs, which is Columbia's public policy school, where I teach nonprofit management and finance, social entrepreneurship, and social innovation. I came to Columbia after many years working in the New York nonprofit sector, specifically focused on equity issues in K-12 education. I am the founder of several nonprofits and understand the complexities of your roles and the challenges you face as you lead and grow your organizations, which is why the Masters in Nonprofit Management program is thrilled to partner with CCS and you as we launch this series of forums designed to support you and your leadership to create more resilient and sustainable and scalable organizations. Now it is my great pleasure to turn it over to Sheba Keys. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. I feel like I don't even need the mic, but we're being recorded. Good morning to everybody. Welcome to, as Sarah said, our first in a series of Accelerator workshops. So you are the inaugural group, so thank you for being here. We have been working on, first of all, I also want to give thanks to the Office of the President and the Forum team for hosting us in this great space. So thank you to them. I also want to say that we're thrilled to start this series. Many of you know that Columbia Community Service is a grant-making initiative that comes out of employee and retiree donated funds from Barnard, from Teachers College, and from Columbia University. What we have been working on, though, over these past few years is trying to think about how we can serve your organizations more, to help you elevate your work, to be partners in your work, and to facilitate more learning and peer networks. So that's what this is the beginning of. Our colleagues at School of Professional Studies have a survey that they put together, so we want to know more about what you need, how we can be helpful, and how we can partner in your work. So that's what this is about. It's about partnership, collaboration, so we are very much looking forward to this. Without further ado, though, I want to get the show started with Sonya Shields, Executive Director and President of Cause Effective. Sonya has 30-plus years of experience and deep expertise in the nonprofit sector. Many of you may already know her from her fantastic work. And so we are so glad that she's going to kick off this series on fundraising and empowering all of you as fundraisers. So thank you for being here, and Sonya.
Thank you. Good morning. I have a broken toe. So, you know, I have never broken a bone. I made it to 60, and now I have a broken toe. So it's a little like, I just keep forgetting that I have a broken toe. So I keep hurting myself even more. I'm a very high energy person, super like, go, go, go. And this morning I banged it again. Yeah, so pray for me because I want it to heal so I can get back in the gym and do all the things that I love to do. Thank you so much. She's my sorority sister. We found that out. We're both a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. And I don't remember how we met. I don't remember. You just sent me an email saying something about let's connect. Oh, okay. Okay, that's right. Yeah, you know, in these past couple of years, I have talked to so many people, you know, because of the virtual space that people will come up to me and I'm like, might be having a senior moment or a virtual moment. I don't know, but thank you so much. I have literally spent my entire career in the nonprofit sector, except for like 2 years that I thought, I'm done with this. And I went and worked in it with an advertising agency as an account executive. And I have to say I learned a lot because I had big accounts and I was dealing with advertising and marketing, and I brought a lot of those learnings back to the nonprofit sector. I began my career really writing direct mail back in the 90s, and just recently, as I was preparing for my first keynote, which I did 2 weeks ago at the nonprofit Staten Island's annual conference, I just sort of went back into my career, and I thought about one of my first jobs. It was the Public Affairs Associate at the International Eye Foundation. I went to look to see if they were still around. I found their website. They had all of their annual reports listed. I saw the annual report that I did when I was 26 years old online, and I saw my name, Sonya Shields, Public Affairs. I was 26 years old, and that was in 1989. So that is how long I've been around. There's so much that I could talk about, but I will just say that, I'm going to, in everything that I do, I really center DEI now. So when I talk about fundraising communications, when I talk about governance, all of it is through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm going to go there around a lot of stuff that we, experience in the sector around racism and power imbalances, because that is the work of Cause Effective at this point in the evolution of the organization, which has been around for 40 years. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary, which was a great event. And that's when I was announced as the new executive director. My former boss, Judy Levine, who had the role of ED for 16 years, announced me at the event. It was quite a moment because I'm the 4th executive director in 40 years and the first person of color. And so I want to put that into context also, as you're listening to me, think about the fact that I was a development professional for many years. I would have never, ever thought that I would ever become an executive director. That is definitely not the path, as we know it in the nonprofit sector, to become an executive director or CEO. And I certainly, I just was not the kind of person that, was like, oh, the title. People might think that oh, she's ambitious. No, I'm purpose-driven. I'm in purpose. And a lot of the choices that I've made has been about social justice and human rights. And that has been the work of Cause Effective, which is why I was attracted to the organization in the first place. So all of the organizations we've worked with pretty much have all been about social justice, human rights, and providing services to people that are in marginalized communities. And we have now worked with over 7,000 nonprofit organizations over the course of the history of the organization. Our primary functions at this point, and why don't I use this? That's me with my curly afro. Now I'm doing twists, as you can see, letting it grow, and Cause Effective. And so our primary functions, fundraising, governance, communications, and strategic planning. We do leadership development cohort programs, especially for BIPOC leaders in the field. But with everything we do is very much focused on helping organizations bring in resources. How are you working with your boards? How are you working with stakeholders? How are you messaging? How are you aligning your fundraising and communications to really support your mission and your work, right? So I'm going to start off by really talking about the landscape of fundraising, and there's a lot to sort of unpack here. So I'm going to do a bit of reading here to just give you some of the history. Because what is very important about this is the DEI journey is understand. What's important in understanding the DEI journey is understanding the history of philanthropy and fundraising and how we got here. So the word philanthropy derives from the ancient Greek phrase philanthropia, meaning to love people. Who knew that? Okay. In the United States, philanthropy emerged from cultural influences, mostly religion. In 1867, the Peabody Education Fund was established by George Peabody after the Civil War for the purpose of promoting education in southern states, except schools for newly freed Black people. Only 6.5% of its disbursements went to schools for Black students in its early years. In 1905, Charles S. Ward was the general counsel for the YMCA, and he came up with the first fundraising campaign as we know it. The fundraising campaign was so effective, the YMCA organizations all around the country began requesting his involvement in their fundraising. In 1916, Ward directed an American Red Cross nationwide membership campaign, increasing membership from 22,500 to over 31 million. At the conclusion of the membership drive in 1917, now imagine that was in 1 year, the first, and that was before social media. So think about those numbers. By 1917, the first American Red Cross nationwide capital campaign raised $123 million. Then the following year, in 1918, the second campaign raised $181 million. At the end of the 19th century, organizations started taking a more systematic approach to the work of improving social conditions and adopted management methods that were gaining a following in the business world. Modern grant making was founded on the large scale donations of a number of individuals and families who made their wealth during the late 19th century and early 20th centuries. You know, Rockefeller, Ford, Sage, Carnegie. Giving was increased by the 1917 passing of legislation that allowed Americans to take tax deductions for their charitable gifts. It's important to point out that with those early fundraising campaigns and the campaigns even of today, many people who support organizations are contributing small gifts. They are philanthropists. But we talk about philanthropists as wealthy donors. It's important to change this narrative because from the beginning, the birth of large-scale, organized philanthropy was infused with an awareness of racial inequality. While perhaps working with good intentions, organized philanthropy's approach to race and race relations was often plagued with problems. Philanthropic programs were undertaken with constraints of segregation and also worked to sustain the existing unjust racist systems. And programs aimed at reducing inequality often portrayed biases and prejudice held by foundation staff members themselves, not to mention reinforced top-down structures of power. So a big part of what we do at Cause Effective is we teach and really help organizations dismantle sort of the traditional fundraising and philanthropic models that honestly I grew up in. It was my practice. You know, this is what I did. I did the same thing. The poverty porn, I did all of the same thing. How do you get the money in, right? But the history of philanthropy is entrenched in savior and charity mindset. From the beginning, it was entrenched in racism, patriarchy, and other forms of oppression, which are the root of every social issue nonprofits and many social enterprises seek to address. We must recognize how these norms have shaped, informed, and influenced philanthropy, including who is deemed trustworthy and who is not. As we think about how to center DEI in fundraising, it's important to broaden the label of fundraiser to conducting philanthropic education. Who's ever thought about philanthropic education? Raise your hand. Okay. It's conducting a fundraising practice through a lens of racial justice, which aims to address systemic racism and promote equity and justice for marginalized communities. It's also equitable engagements with a donor. And when working with governmental agencies, foundations, corporations, it should not be top-down directive model where those who have the resources believe they hold the power. Racial justice philanthropy aims to address these disparities and supports services, social change movements, and policies that specifically focus on dismantling the systemic racism and empowering communities. Racial justice philanthropy is educating donors and funders onto systemic issues within a community that has, for example, caused people to be unhoused, that have caused Black and brown young men to be impacted by the justice system. It's shifting from the narrative that philanthropy is charity work, and we are saving those who are less fortunate or who don't work as hard, to what is necessary to support lasting structural changes that creates a more equitable society. So let's look at who gives, because there's this dominant narrative that it's wealthy white men. It's easy to think of philanthropy as something done by the very wealthy or big foundations or doesn't matter, companies. 6 out of 10 US households donate to charity in a given year, and the typical household's annual gift adds up to between $2,000 and $3,000. Who knew that? That's not the narrative, right? There are many reasons for this. I would say the foremost reason is religion. Religion motivates giving more than any other factor. A second explanation is our deep-rooted tradition of mutual aid. But dissecting who is generous and who is not can be controversial. And not all of the research agrees, but one thing is certain: it's time to reframe philanthropy and the archetype of who is a philanthropist and not just wealthy white men. What this means when raising money is taking a much more holistic lens into donor cultivation and engagement strategies. Yes, there are big fish that we have to reel in, and thanks to the wealth gap, those fish often fit the archetype of the wealthy white philanthropist, but not always. We can't forget about the other 90% of donors across the racial and ethnic spectrum who also give proportionately and give far more than just dollars. So some of the data, just to level set around DEI issues in fundraising and philanthropy, there is someone said to me and asked me a question. I was like, my mouth fell open. I was doing a workshop, and he said, well, after George Floyd and, this uptick and, there's been so much attention on Black-led organizations, I'm just finding it hard. This is a white guy. I'm just finding it really hard, to raise money, and it just seems like all the money is going to those organizations, Black and brown-led organizations. I was like, well, please show me this data, because it doesn't exist, okay? That is definitely not the case. Yes, there was an uptick. It's like rage gifts, when Roe versus Wade happened, a lot of reproductive justice organizations received an uptick. Those are rage gifts. Those are like usually one-time gifts. You know how Americans are. We're up in an uproar, and then we have like, ADHD, and then we're on to the next thing. So believe me, I work with many of those organizations, and there is no major funding going to Black and brown-led organizations. I can tell you that. The leadership gap: 80% of nonprofit leaders, CEOs, and board members are white. There's an inequity for BIPOC-led organizations lag behind their white counterparts in terms of fundraising, lack of diversity. 90% of AFP members identify as white. That's 90%. AFP has been around a long time. I'm on the board. I always talk about this. I'm on the board, and I'm always bringing this up, like 90%. Racism, development professionals of color routinely experience bias, microaggressions, and biases. And there's an inherent power dynamics in donor relations, and charged nature of fundraising interactions are magnified by these issues. As you approach raising money for your organization and social enterprises, it's important to know, especially for people of color, that navigating dynamics around race and power imbalance in fundraising is so common. Even people who are well-informed have just a lot of unconscious bias. There is work to do to close the gap around the continued lack of Black and brown leadership, the lack of access that Black and brown leaders experience in terms of access to funding. And again, yes, there was the uptick in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd, but that, I've seen many organizations experience that uptick and then try to connect with those very same donors and have a lot of challenges with engaging them and cultivating relationships to the people that gave to those organizations. But the good news is there is movement amongst organizations and institutions, foundations and corporations, working to dismantle the systemic practices that continue to reinforce and amplify inequities and keep people oppressed and living in poverty. So, I know how many of you have heard about trust-based philanthropy? Okay, it's what I find is there are foundations, some that are really working to think about how they make funding decisions, and they recognize that it's been very top-down and they want it to be more inclusive. They understand the power that they're holding, and some of the things that they're wanting organizations to measure in terms of matrix are based on a lack of understanding of systemic issues going on within communities. And so a lot of foundations are looking at those questions and, what do they think what does success look like? They'll give you $70,000 and think you're supposed to create transformation with $70,000. It's like, you can't create transformation with $70,000 in a year, right? So how are they really, truly partnering with organizations? It's refreshing to see that there are some foundations looking at that, but I can tell you as someone who has to raise money from some of these very same foundations that they have not really figured out how to operationalize it yet. So we'll see how that all goes. So think about how your family background, upbringing has shaped your attitude about money. Why did your family value money? Like, did your family value money? What do you consider to be, a lot of money, both in general and specifically as it relates to fundraising? All of those questions are really important questions, because when I became a fundraiser, of course, I had never had conversations with people about money, right? I grew up in Great Neck, New York, Great Neck, Long Island, and I was around a lot of kids who came from a range of socio and economic backgrounds, from people who were wealthy and had housekeepers, and I rarely saw their parents, to kids whose mother or grandmother were the housekeepers of the wealthy. So there was a wide range. My family was working class, and I lived very comfortably. I never wanted really for anything. But I knew at a young age that money was out there, lots of it. I was never in spaces where we discussed it, though. I thought it was personal. And so when I began raising money from individuals, I thought, this is personal. I had never talked to anyone about money, and I felt really uncomfortable about it. And I realized that if I was going to be a successful fundraiser, I was going to have to unpack my relationship to money. And I started really having conversations with myself about, I did not want to see myself as the help. I didn't want to see myself as someone that was feeling like there was this power imbalance between me and the donor or the funder. So I started literally, this is 1997, so think about this, I think I was 33. I was like, I'm a change agent. I started seeing myself as a change agent, and I started saying, I'm conducting philanthropic education. And I, started having conversations with donors and board members and funders through a lens of I'm educating them and I'm connecting with them based on shared values and the impact that they want to make, And I really looked at it as an opportunity to partner with me. This mindset enabled me to feel more confident in my role. I aligned with my purpose as someone who cares about issues, as an activist. The challenge throughout my career is when I have worked in spaces where traditional fundraising and philanthropic models are the norm, and where white supremacy culture is dominant within an organization's operation. Who knows what are the characteristics of white supremacy culture in a nonprofit organization? Wow, well, that's a whole nother workshop because it does exist. There's lots of data on that, but we don't have time to get into that. But if you know racism exists in America, we know it exists in the nonprofit industry, right? So it's very challenging to be a successful fundraiser as a Black or brown person if you're working within that type of environment. And Cause Effective has really worked, our work is designed to help BIPOC leaders and our allies navigate and unpack and work to center DEI within organizations, fundraising, communications, and governance. Who has heard about community-centric fundraising? This is just absolutely beautiful. There are 10 principles, and it comes out of the West Coast, and there's a whole movement around it. Now, I'll just read them out loud. Fundraising must be grounded in race, equity, and social justice. Individual, organizational missions are not as important as the collective community. Nonprofits are generous with and mutually supportive of one another. All who engage in strengthening the community are equally valued, whether volunteer, staff, donor, or board member. Time is valued equally as money. We treat donors as partners, and this means that we are transparent, assume the best intentions, and occasionally have difficult conversations. We foster a sense of belonging, not othering. We promote the understanding that everyone, donors, staff, funders, board members, volunteers, personally benefits from engaging in the work of social justice. It's not just charity and compassion. We see the work of social justice as holistic and transformative, not transactional. We recognize that healing and liberation requires a commitment to economic justice. It's beautiful, right? Absolutely beautiful. So I talked a few minutes ago about the shift that I made to see myself as a change agent, but before I embraced that I was living my purpose, I understood my worth. Thank you to my family. I didn't see myself as the help. I was often in spaces in the early part of my career where I was around people with a lot of money, and I felt completely comfortable in those spaces, and I always have. I think one of the things that has helped me throughout my career is my comfortableness being around all kinds of people. And as I said, that goes back to my childhood. So I'm bringing this up because if you're someone who has to bring in money, it's not just the practice of understanding how to cultivate a donor or a funder or your message, it's your mindset. People have to really understand fundraising is so much about your mindset. So knowing yourself is about identity, and we are layered. It's what makes human beings complex. There are different layers to identity. There's your primary identity, right? Gender identity, national origin, age, class, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age. Then there is your secondary identity, which I don't think we think about as much. Working style, cognitive skills, appearance, religion, education, geographic location, even communication style. There's even an organizational identity and cultural identity, but that's another training. We are layered, and our identities is what we refer to as intersectionality. And again, that's another workshop. But the point is, there is beauty in this. Unfortunately, we live in a society where inclusion and the ability to honor our multiple identities is something that is our work. It's work that must be prioritized within organizations, institutions, businesses, and corporations. The othering that people do in so many spaces and putting people in boxes and not working from a space of inclusion and intersectionality creates barriers and blocks or opportunities for growth. Everyone has life experiences that have made you who you are, your set of beliefs. For some people, their beliefs are very hardwired. Why is all of this important to fundraising? Because fundraising isn't about money. It's not actually about money. Your mindset, your values, how you see yourself and others, do not put people in boxes. Are you checking your own biases? All of this plays a huge role in the ability to generate resources to support your nonprofit organization, because fundraising is about values. It's not about money. I consciously work on knowing myself. I am someone who has spent a lot of time self-reflecting, working to expand. I have a growth mindset. There have been days throughout the years where I had to go into a meeting with a donor or a funder or a board member or whatever, and I'm not in the right state of mind. Because, I know how to ask for money, but you got to be in the right state of mind. And especially as a Black person, right? Like sometimes I'm in situations and I'm like, okay, I'm dealing with this power dynamic. I mean, I've literally been, and I'm not going to mention the institution because it's a well-known New York institution. I literally was with my former boss, Judy Levine. We go into a big conference room, we're sitting there, and a funder said to us, this is the first sentence, "So tell me about your program so that we can decide whether we want to replicate it or partner with you." What? Like, no problem saying that to us. I've heard it all. So I can be the best fundraiser in the world, but how am I going to deal with that, right? So this is about mindset. This is about knowing your worth, your purpose. This is about philanthropic education, your ability to navigate that craziness, because that was crazy. And you have to know how to okay, what did you just, what? Like, you have to be able to come back from that, to educate this funder, to check them on their, inappropriateness and be able to do that. So again, self-doubt popping up will happen, should be acknowledged as nothing more than a pattern of thinking, a habit, self-doubt is going to happen, all the self-talk and all of that goes on. I personally, I have always had my own sort of vision statements for myself. I always go back to am I aligned with this organization? Am I in purpose? Does this make sense? Because sometimes I've worked places where I felt like I just was not aligned with the organization at all. We were not on the same page, and I did not stay long, because how can you be an enthusiastic fundraiser if you don't feel aligned with the organization's values and mission? I'm going to fast forward. So again, fundraising. What is fundraising? Today we will focus a little bit more on, I think, not just, again, the practice of fundraising, but, for so many people, the word comes up to this negative connotation, because fundraising has such a bad rap, right? People focus on the money. They focus on what they think people can afford. They think what people have in their checking account. Then literally, you're thinking, can this person afford this $100? You're trying to, math it out about what somebody else can afford. But don't they have a child in public, private school? I don't know if they're going to be able to afford this ticket to this event. So again, people have a relationship to money which starts from our childhood. So the anxiety that comes up is that people are thinking about fundraising based on their relationship to money and personalizing it. It can be paralyzing for some people. This manifests into not asking, literally not asking people for financial support because of the stories that they create in their head about money based on their relationship to money. People will convince themselves that they are bothering someone. I don't know if I want to call this person. I probably am interrupting something. I've watched people block taking action to fundraise because of being afraid of hearing the word no. They see it as someone saying no to them. The person is not saying no to you. They're saying no, not at this time, or maybe no, not that cause. My best fundraising has always been when I feel passionate about the organization and aligned with the organization's vision and mission. If I didn't feel aligned, as I said, then I knew that this was not the place for me. When you think about the fact that fundraising isn't about money and it's about values, what role has your values played in how you engage people to support your organization at this point? Is it something that you thought about, or has your focus been on the money and the bottom line? Raise your hand if you've thought about your values if you are a fundraiser. Great, great. How many of you feel urgency to get the money in the door and the bottom line? Same thing, right? Why do you think? Someone, why do you think that is? Why is there this struggle? It's an urgency, that feeling of urgency, that feeling of payroll, that urgency, that energy that you're bringing into the organization, though, has a ripple effect. It has a ripple effect on your staff. It has a ripple effect on your stress level, on your sleep, causes insomnia, health problems. If you're operating, it's not sustainable. You cannot operate like that. It's not sustainable, right? So let's talk about strategy to identifying people that you want to cultivate to support your organization. One of the mistakes that people have made in so many donor prospect brainstorming meetings and board meetings throughout the years is when people think that, they'll think about potential donors, they'll immediately focus on people who have money, but not someone who is necessarily aligned with their mission or their values. They'll go to the money first, right? And it's always someone that's unreachable. When I worked for a big Brooklyn organization, I can't tell you how many times Jay-Z's name came up. Like all of these names of people, who are famous. I'm like, does anyone have a connection to this person? So there's so much I could share about this, but I will just tell you really quickly that if you're ever in a prospect kind of conversation where you're thinking about donors and coming up with a list of donors, think of yourself standing in a circle, right? And then you're thinking about all of the people that you know in your own inner circle that you think is aligned with your values and the organization's mission. Write their names down. The amount doesn't matter. Don't go to, the person that could write a check for $1,000 or more. Well, no one writes checks anymore. Give $1,000 or more. Think about somebody who could donate $10. That's another problem. You're thinking about the bigger gifts, and that's a power thing that's going on. Think about people who can contribute. Then once you start to think about people in your inner circle, then your role is to start to cultivate relationships with them, keep them engaged, educate them through philanthropic education to start engaging people in their circles. So now this circle starts to get wider. And that's how you start to build a donor base. You start here and then you work your way out. What happens is people primarily do this thing where when they're trying to do prospecting, they'll think about people that are out of reach. For whatever reason, our mind goes to someone that's out of reach. You'll go to the person that you think has the most money first. Again, because you're thinking about the bottom line. You're not thinking about the long game. You're thinking about how can I get this money in the door as fast as possible and not thinking about cultivating relationships. Before I go to the next slide, I'm going to ask all of you to just throw out some percentages. So there's this thing called the development cycle. And the development cycle is it's broken up into identifying donors, cultivation, solicitation, and recognition, acknowledging the gift. So identification, cultivation, solicitation, recognizing the gift. What percentage of time do you think that you should be spending on identifying donors? Just throw out some percentages. 90% identifying. Who else? We'll take 10, 20, 90, one more. 30. It's 5%. Identification, finding donors is 5%. How much time do you think you should be spending cultivating donors, educating them, inviting them to things, sending them things? 60, 70, 80, 50. That's much better. 90%. So 90% of your time should be spent talking. You know, just if you are on social media, which you all should be if you're running organizations, as much as you might not like it, communicating what you do on LinkedIn and other platforms, sharing information, inviting people to things, really coming up with a communication strategy. And that's a big point, that you cannot do fundraising without a communication strategy. How is anyone going to know about your organization if you don't let people know that you exist? You can't jump into fundraising without people, like, what's the story that you're telling? You got to have a story to raise money. So communications and fundraising have to go hand in hand.
Are you talking about existing core funders or
New funders, new fund. Well, even the cultivation, great question. Even the cultivation, personally, I always feel like you should have a couple of touch points of even a major funder. I don't feel comfortable at all getting $125,000 from a funder and then they don't hear from us until the next time we're asking for money. That's not good. So cultivation is a big part of what all of you should be doing, even no matter what your role is in an organization, but especially if you're an executive director. And then solicitation is 2%, recognition is 3%. You should all take a picture of that and remember that, because it's really important. Got that? So, as I said, you can't fundraise without making the case. So that's a big thing. It's a really big thing, because a lot of organizations forget, I know this is literally forget your purpose. Like, you're so in the weeds of what you're doing that you forget. Like, I can't tell you how many organizations I'll talk to and they don't have a narrative. There's no narrative. You'll say, what's your boilerplate proposal? Like, what's your strongest proposal that you would be sending out to a funder? They don't have it. Do you have talking points? Like, you're saying you're frustrated with your board. Did you give your board any talking points? What are your talking points? If you're meeting with someone, do you have talking points? Oh, you know, I've just been so busy. How can you be a fundraiser and not have a narrative for your own organization? It has to be a priority. Communications has to be a priority. So your narrative, making your case, then you break that down into talking points. That has to align with the communication strategy. You know, it's your stories that you're telling, you know, the impact of your work. Again, another huge workshop. But making the case is really, really important. You know, one of the mistakes that people have made, again, is just jumping in and not pausing to really have a better understanding of, are you all on the same page around your messaging? Like, are you all saying the same thing? Why you launched your organization in the first place? It's the, you know, what was the purpose? You know, what is the relevance? What is the solution? What are the results that you're trying to achieve? Some of the guidelines for making the case, and these are really important questions, so please take a picture of this. Does the case for support clearly define the organization's mission and vision for the future? Are the organization's finances clearly presented? Are the arguments for increased funding compelling? Do potential donors, funders, and investors understand the impact that their investment will have on the organization? Does the case for support explain the impact on the surrounding community and the larger society? That's a really big one, because a lot of times I see that organizations' focus is very narrow, you know, very narrow. And I get that if you're working on, if you're leading an organization that's in the Bronx, there's so much need in the Bronx, you can only but it's like, you could take the Bronx, you can go to Detroit, you can go to Baltimore, you know. You could go to many cities around this country and there's a lot of the same issues. So you have to look at systemic issues. You've got to start educating funders and donors of these systemic issues. And these systemic issues are affecting who mostly? Black and brown people, poor people. So you got to have that narrative, right, to really help people to understand that This is not about people who are less fortunate or people who don't work hard and all this stuff. This is generational poverty and trauma and how that plays out in families throughout generations, right? I'm sure there are plenty of people living in the Bronx that don't know how to help to get out of the Bronx. They would love to get out of the situations that they're in if they had the resources to do so. So it's not about the population, it's about the systems. So you have to take the time to educate people on the systems, the systemic issues. Yep, I'm getting ready to wrap, actually. And does the case for support make logical sense? Do readers show emotional responses to the case statement? Is the case statement succinct? Are individuals able to identify and articulate the major points of the organization and reasons for the campaign? Does the case statement inspire action? And then the last two slides, and then we can take some questions. Just real quick, please take pictures. The elements of fundraising and communications, again, case for support. You start with your why. You don't start with how. You start with why. Anytime you're getting ready to talk to a funder, anytime you're getting ready to write anything, you start with why. Messaging, talking points, you gotta have materials. You have to focus on social media. If you don't like it, you have to. There has to be an email strategy. What stories are you telling? What are you measuring in terms of impact and success? And then you also want to promote your staff. And when I say promote, like, let people know who's working there. Like, who's on the front line of the work. So, promote them on social media and highlight them in newsletters and through email strategies, along with your board and volunteers. And actively build your email donor and foundation and corporate list. When you're engaging people, add them to your list. Tell people, join my list, follow us on social media. Be active about that. And very important, of course, cultivation we talked about in stewardship. And then make sure you're updating your website and keeping it fresh. I know that some people do people still look at websites? Yeah, we do. We definitely go straight to websites. We go straight to your social media platforms. And with that, I will end and take some questions. Yes. Thank you.
You had a bullet up there about finding new donors.
I can pass it over.
Yeah, sure.
We want to make sure and record people.
Sure.
Get your.
I've had laryngitis, so yeah, perfect. You had a bullet up there about finding new donors. When you're a mature nonprofit and you've run the table on finding foundations and beating the bushes on corporations and you feel like you're tapped out, how do you find new?
What's your organization?
It's a literacy organization called the Reading Team in Harlem, been around for about 22 years. Works with early literacy services for kids from 3 to 5th grade, the critical years when you have to learn and read or you're in trouble. It's been very successful. It's extremely focused, academic. And we have a lot of good funders like Pinkerton, the big ones, Dreyfus and so forth. So it feels a little bit like, I still search for foundations. I think I find some, but it feels like the well's running a little bit dry.
Okay, I'm gonna tell you. What's your vision?
Well, we have a mission statement.
I know. So so just think about this. So you're trying to find the donors. You're trying to find more donors, right? You're trying to okay, so how do I find more donors? How do I find more funders? Don't go there first. Look at, okay, where are we as an organization? How do we need to level up? What's our next, what's the next chapter? Is there a possibility for growth? Is there something else that you should be doing in terms of advocacy? Should you be partnering with someone? Is there a campaign that you could potentially launch, right? Because you've got to be thinking about what should we be doing to level up, to evolve in order to create a new narrative to start attracting new funding. Don't go to, let me try to find people. What should your organization be doing? Particularly when you look at what's going on in New York, around the country, around education, what's the new story that you should be telling? So also, it's not necessarily about the services, it's about your voice. What's the voice? Maybe it's at a point now that you got to sort of think about how do you evolve your organization after 22 years. Come up with a strategy in terms of where you want to be in 25 years. Who else?
I think I'll go. My name is Angela Williams. I'm with Common Denominator. My organization is at an inflection point right now. I came on about 3 years ago, and I saw it very vividly as far as the philanthropic education, as far as the inequities. And I looked at my demographics that we serve, and we serve 92% Black and brown kids. We're very clear about what the socioeconomic status is. What I find is that I'm having a problem transforming the messaging of that story, which is so compelling and so obvious to our board. And so any thoughts or help that you could provide would be incredible.
What?
All lives matter. That's what I hear on the board. We serve all students. We provide math tutoring. That's what we do. And I'm like, listen, we got to hone in on this. So that's where my challenge lies. Anything you can do would help.
Are these board members that have been around for a long time?
Long time, 3 to 4 years.
That's it?
Yeah,
Who brought on these board members?
prior to me. So I've been really working to make those changes in my staffing, in my board.
Okay. So, I was with an organization as a COO, and it's an organization that deals with Black and brown young men that have been impacted by the justice system. And the founder was a wealthy white man who was with a huge perfume company. And he was invited to speak at Rikers. I'll just, as the organization's getting out, staying out, go so. He was invited to speak at Rikers. It was such an amazing transformational experience that he just kept going back to Rikers to talk to the young men. He started creating connection and decided he was going to start this organization. He said to them, when you get out, come meet me literally at a coffee shop, and I'm gonna talk with you and I'm gonna help you find a job. Long story short, he found this organization, but the whole narrative of this organization was second chance. Everyone deserves a second chance. Of course, wealthy white man, his wife was also like a prominent person here in New York City. They started bringing in money, it grew, opened up an office, had a gala, which was, lots of corporations, all the things. The problem is that even though this organization grew and they built like a team of social workers and they were doing the case management, all the things, helping young Black and brown men find jobs, their narrative was one that was very much that charity mindset, savior. Everyone deserves a second chance. When you started to look at the data and look at why a lot of these Black and brown young men were incarcerated in the first place, most of the time it had nothing to do with anything that they did, right? They ended up being arrested because maybe they were walking down the street smoking a blunt and ended up being in Rikers for like 9 months. Just crazy, crazy stories, right? So when I was hired as a CEO, I brought in a director of development, a white woman, who is all about it. We are totally aligned. And we came in like, and they also brought in a new executive director after he left. And we were like, we're gonna talk about racism. We're going to talk about over-policing, overcharging. We're going to talk about all of these things. We're going to be, bold and tell the truth, right? So the narrative started to change, and the culture started to change. Their social media presence started to change, right? I'm telling you, the followers started, there was an uptick in followers, a younger generation of supporters, more on the radar. We got Robin Hood funding. We got Ford Foundation. Everything started to be this major uptick because we started talking about race and racism and all of that. But there were some board members that were uncomfortable with this because they liked doing the good, they liked it. I don't want to be a part of talking about racism, right? Some of them left. But you got to be walking the talk. Like there was a generation of staff members there that, absolutely you could see how they started to feel more empowered, feel more affirmed, right? So a big part of what's happening there is you got to be more bold. You don't need to wait for them to tell you what the messaging should be. You got to start creating the messaging, and if some of them leave, so be it. I mean, that's pretty much it. That's why they hired you, right? They didn't hire you to have them, how they're not shaping the narrative. You're the one who's on the front lines. You know the communities more than they do. You're educating them on the issues. So they may, if you create a new narrative and you come up with a communication strategy that's aligned with fundraising, and you start thinking about how you want to like tell stories on social media and all that, I would say that you bring that to the board. And of course, there are going to be some of them are going to be like, well, this doesn't feel like the organization like it. So what? You're doing what's right. This is what's right. Right? You got to be aligned in what feels right and being authentic. Can we do one more?
Can you elaborate a little bit about social justice as it opposed to an arts organization? Mine's a sports organization. I know in my heart what it does for the kids that we do, but we run across some funders that say, you're not doing social justice. Like, yes, we are. So it's got to be the message, but I would like to get your take on it.
Wow, that is so interesting. So tell everybody.
Wendy Hilliard, I have a gymnastics foundation. We've been here in New York, and we provide free and low-cost gymnastics for kids and take them up to the highest level.
Okay, I'm just going to go within. I mean, I think that that's crazy. So somebody who says that just is pretending like racism doesn't exist in America, is that, because that's what that sounds like to me. Who's saying this?
It was a funder, and they were just saying you don't fall under this pocket,
Okay,
right?
that drives me crazy. So it's like they have their funding guidelines, and you're not because they see that they don't know what to do with sports. They don't know what to do with it. So it doesn't fit into one of their categories.
Right.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but we have socioeconomic issues within America. I don't know the data off the top of my head, but I would assume that the young women that are part of your program, it's all girls, right?
Girls and boys.
Girls and boys. I would assume that they come from poor and low-income families, correct?
Yes.
How in the hell is that not like, help me here? So they don't have the ability to go to some, gymnastic academy. Right? Because they have no money to pay the tuition so we need your organization so that young people can, the confidence, I'm sure this helps with mental health issues, right? Yeah. I'm doing this off the top of my head. Mental health issues, right? Focus, I'm sure it helps them in terms of being a part of a team or individual focus, discipline, all of these different things. Right?
They didn't say we fall under social justice.
Pardon?
They said we didn't fall under social justice.
Well, sometimes they just see it as policy, like which policy are you shaping? Are you doing advocacy? Here's the thing that I just want everyone to understand about the question also, and that is, it takes more time to engage funders and donors and to kind of continue to build your base of support. It takes more time, so sometimes when you hear something like that, you're just like, But what you got to do is like your narrative, you need to build that narrative out so that it's clear, maybe you're already doing this, where you're talking about the fact that the program that you're providing is a pathway for Black and brown young people to be able to feel, all of the things, the social, emotional, skills, leadership, all of those things that can be a pathway to higher education. And I'm assuming that's a part of what you're all about, right? You're not just giving them a place to kind of tumble, right? So it's about educating the funder around the fact that this is a pathway to everything like community development, stronger families, jobs, all of the things. So you got to create that bigger narrative. And again, I'm doing this off the top of my head, but I think that it's limiting in terms of they're not understanding what social justice actually is, and it's not just about policy. Right? Yeah? All right. Thank you all. And please find us, Cause Effective, on LinkedIn and all of the social media platforms. You can find me there as well. And I hope you all will stay in touch. Have a good week. All of the things.